just an unexpected loud bang, and the windshield of the plane's front left side blew off. Result was horrible. In just a second, all the air inside the cockpit was sucked out, and the captain, who had been calmly flying the plane just moments ago, was suddenly sucked out of the plane halfway outside. His body got pulled through the open window. His legs stuck inside, but his head and upper body flapping outside like a rag doll. And all this was happening while the plane was flying over 23,000 feet. The wind outside was blowing at nearly 400 miles per hour, plus it was freezing cold, similar to how it feels on top of Mount Everest. The captain's arms hung loose, he wasn't moving at all, and inside the cockpit, everything went crazy. Thick fog covered the windows. The sound of the air was louder than a rock concert. Besides, warning alarms started beeping like mad. Meanwhile, the plane suddenly tilted forward with a heavy jerk and started falling fast because the autopilot had switched off. The captain's body had slammed against the controls, which forced the nose of the plane down. The engines were stuck at full speed, and the co-pilot, Alistair Aitchison, who had just driven in that morning from Manchester, was in utter shock and panic, and in a state of confusion, with the lives of 81 passengers and 6 crew in his hands. This is the crazy story of the British Airways Flight 5390 accident, and the main reason behind it might leave you traumatized. 10th of June 1990, England, British Airways. Flight 5390 was on a routine journey from Birmingham Airport to Malaga in Spain. The 42-year-old Captain Timothy Lancaster had logged over 11,000 flight hours, including 1,075 on the BAC 111. And his co-pilot, Alistair Aitchison, just 3 years junior to Tim, had 7,500 hours of flying experience, with 1,100 on the same aircraft model. So in the beginning, everything looked perfect. The aircraft smoothly took off at 8:20 in the morning. Both pilots released their shoulder harnesses, and Lancaster loosened his lap belt, following normal procedures during ascent. Just 13 minutes after the takeoff, while flying over Didcot at about 17,300 feet, flight attendant Nigel Ogden was about to enter the cockpit. And that's when a violent bang shook the cockpit. The left windshield panel on the captain's side had blown out. The gust of wind pulled Captain Lancaster from his seat, sucking his upper body out of the aircraft. Luckily, his legs got caught in the controls, keeping him pinned halfway out. All these happened in just 1 second or two before anyone could understand anything. Plus, the rapid decompression filled the cockpit with mist. The co-pilot couldn't see clearly. Neither could he clearly hear the radio. Meanwhile, his captain was dangling out of the plane. Nigel Ogden rushed into the cockpit and saw the unbelievable sight that was synonymous with death. But without thinking, Nigel first grabbed the captain's legs. The wind was so strong it almost pulled Nigel out too. But Nigel held on, wrapping his arms tight around the captain's legs. He braced himself against the seat frame and didn't let go. Soon after, another crew member, John Heward, forced his way into the cockpit. After dealing with the first shock of the situation, he strapped himself in and helped Nigel keep the captain in place. Both men held on as the freezing wind screamed around them. And all these happened while the plane was diving through one of the busiest skies in Europe. But the co-pilot kept flying. The crew kept holding on. The captain's body was still outside, ice-cold, motionless. Nobody knew if the captain was alive or dead, and there was still a long way to go. Overall, the cockpit looked like a war zone. Aitchison had just one thought: get this plane down fast. It was risky, but they had to get to a lower altitude quickly, because the plane, an old BAC 111, didn't have enough oxygen masks for everyone. And up there, without oxygen, people could pass out or even die. The cabin crew, Sue Prince and Simon Rogers, were trying to keep everyone calm. But the plane was dropping fast, down to 11,000 feet in just 2.5 minutes. It felt like the floor had disappeared. Meanwhile, cabin crew Simon moved to the front, strapped himself into the jump seat, and helped get the captain's legs out of the way. They wedged his feet behind a seat to stop him from flying out completely. It was brutal. There was a quick moment where they all wondered, should we let go? But Aitchison knew what could happen if they let the captain's body fly away. It could hit a wing, the tail, or even the engine, which could tear the plane apart. So they kept holding on. But there was another problem. Everything inside the cockpit, maps, checklists, tools, had been sucked out of the window. Aitchison had no instruments to guide him, no idea what speed he was flying, no navigation help. And for a while, there was no radio contact either. He was flying completely blind in one of the busiest skies in the world. Finally, after what felt like forever, air traffic control responded. They offered a nearby airport, Southampton. Aitchison asked for Gatwick at first, the only airport he really knew. But there was no time, so he had to go to Southampton only, where he had never landed before. Plus, he had no maps of the airport, no idea what the runway looked like, just a voice on the other end of the radio guiding him step by step. Besides, he noticed another problem that no one had mentioned yet. The aircraft was still heavy with fuel, and this model couldn't dump fuel mid-air. That meant it would hit the ground faster and harder. If it were a normal flight, by the time it would have reached its original destination, most of the fuel would have been used, and the plane would have landed smoothly. But this plane was faced with two problems. One, a lot of fuel in the tank, and two, the runway at Southampton was short, only 1,800 meters. If he landed too fast or if the brakes failed, the plane could skid off the runway. But still, he lined it up. When he finally spotted the runway with his own eyes, he told the air controllers that he didn't need any assistance. Now it was just him. One pilot trying to crash land one broken plane with 84 people sitting behind him. So the next few minutes would decide everyone's fate. Luckily, just 32 minutes after takeoff, the plane made a perfect emergency landing at Southampton Airport. Fire trucks and rescue teams were already there. Paramedics rushed in. The passengers were taken off the plane, still shaken and crying. The crew pulled out what looked like the frozen, lifeless body of the captain. But what happened next was something no one saw coming. Days later, under the care of doctors, Tim Lancaster's body started to respond. Bit by bit, he came back. His fingers moved. He started breathing on his own. Memories returned in flashes. How he got sucked out from his seat. How cold it felt. How unreal everything seemed. He had broken bones, bruises, frostbite, and shock. The good part is he was recovering faster than anyone expected. And what about Alistair Aitchison? What he did was nothing short of heroic. As a result of this flight's experience to help pilots in the future, the Royal Air Force started training them in something called hypoxia simulation. In simple words, it's a way to show what happens to your body when you lose oxygen at high altitudes. Inside special chambers, they slowly take the air away. First, a fog appears like steam from a boiling kettle. Then your brain starts to slow down. You feel confused and dizzy like you're drunk. If no oxygen is given quickly, you pass out. And if no one helps, you die. It's a slow, invisible kind of danger. That's what Tim went through without warning. But behind all these, one question became irresistible. Why did all these happen? Back at the airport, investigators started looking into what went wrong. The senior investigator, Stuart Cullen, was surprised to see that the plane didn't have any major damage. There were no signs of birds hitting it, no broken glass lying around. The cockpit window frame was still in place. So how did the window alone blow out? And soon they found the reason. It wasn't because of the plane, but because of something someone did. And when they found out exactly who and what caused it, it changed everything. While Mr. Cullen did not get much of the clue at first, one thing stood out: the maintenance log. It showed that someone had replaced the windscreen just the day before. That was the first real lead. So Cullen rushed to the British Airways hangar in Birmingham. He started by gathering all the paperwork connected to the plane's repairs. The engineer who'd done the job had just finished an all-night shift. The timing matched the crash too closely to ignore. Once he'd had some rest, they sat him down for an interrogation. Turns out he had done the job alone, no backup, no supervisor. Soon after, a big update came in. The missing windscreen had been found near a village named Chalsey in South Oxfordshire. And next to the windscreen, there were around 30 bolts. Most of them were too thin, not by much, just a tiny bit, but that was enough to matter. Here you need to know one thing: this plane wasn't built like others. The BAC 111's windscreen is held in place from the outside using bolts. To put it simply, it's like putting the lid on a soda bottle from the outside, then shaking it. If the bolts don't hold tight, that lid will blow off, and exactly that's what happened here. The wrong bolts gave out when the pressure got too high. But when the real reason came out, the engineer was clearly shaken. He dug through the trash and pulled out the old bolts to show he had compared them to the new ones. But all he'd done was match them by eye, and that was the problem. He never looked at the manual. He didn't double-check the size. The result? What looked right wasn't actually right. So here's what happened. At 4 in the morning, working under bad lighting and in a tight spot, he started pulling out the old bolts. The plane was parked too close to the hangar doors, making everything harder. The old bolts weren't even correct either, but they'd lasted 4 years. The new ones? Picked from a bin in a different hangar. Grabbed in a rush. Looked similar, but they were just a hair too narrow. By 6 a.m. the job was done and the plane looked normal and ready for the next flight. But when the plane climbed high and the air outside got thinner, the air inside the cabin kept pushing out harder. That pressure was too much for the skinny bolts. They gave up and the windscreen flew off. So Cullen had solved what went wrong, but he hadn't figured out why it happened yet. Yes, why would an experienced engineer ignore such an important manual? Why take such a big risk? And what Cullen found was unsettling. People weren't being careless on purpose, and they were just doing everything out of habits passed down over the years. So, Cullen tried something different. No tough questioning, no threats, just honest conversations. And to dig deeper, he brought in a psychologist, and this is not a usual move in these kinds of cases. But the idea worked. They found that not only the one who was guilty, but many other engineers had been skipping steps for years, not because they didn't care, but because they felt lethargic and tried to get the job done as fast as possible. So Cullen's report didn't just blame a bolt or a person, it showed the cracks in the whole system, and it forced the aviation world to change, from pilot training to how engineers are taught. But what Cullen didn't know yet was that this wasn't the last surprise this case would throw at him. British Airways lawyers didn't like what the report said. Still, the message got through. The way planes were being maintained needed to change. Meanwhile, Captain Tim Lancaster, the man sucked out of the window, was back flying after 5 months. But not everyone handled the trauma well. Flight attendant Nigel Ogden, who held on to Tim's legs during the chaos, couldn't shake it. He left flying, so did Simon and Sue. One crew member later sat on a similar plane and had a panic attack on the spot. Aitchison kept flying too, but he never talked about the incident. Not once. And I'm sure after knowing this incident, you'd probably also think twice before booking a flight ticket, won't you? Share your views in the comments below. And if you want to hear about more flight disasters, just subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon. See you soon. Until then, fly safe.